Hi there, my name is Irene, and in this video, we're going to be talking about how we can edit SketchUp textures directly in model. So we're going to be doing that using texture positions, projections, etc. And the reason that this is so important in the context of interior design is because a lot of times it's not enough to create a custom texture and then apply that to your geometry, but you also want to make sure that that texture behaves in a realistic way. So let's get to it. All right, so I'm in a simple project as usual, and I'm going to start just by drawing a rectangle that is going to be 10 feet by 10 feet. Nothing crazy. And I am going to be applying a SketchUp tile. So obviously you're going to want to do this with your own custom materials, but I just want to show here that this is something that is important regardless of how you work with materials. So I am going to select, let's go with this checkered material, and I'm going to apply it in my project. And the first kind of editing that I want to discuss is the alignment of your texture. Because what you can see here, let's go to a top view, is that my squares are not really starting and ending with the edges of my geometry. Now, this is bad. If this would be a real tile job in the real world, and the tile guy or lady does the tile like this, you need a new tile person because this is awful. Like, there's going to be a ton of waste. Like, this is just an eyesore. So the first thing that I want to show is that you can actually change the relationship between the texture and the geometry by deforming the geometry. So this is very important. There is a difference between selecting the whole geometry or the component of the geometry and editing the raw geometry. So what do I mean with that? Well, if I select the whole floor, let's call it a floor, and I make it into a group or component, when I go to move it, nothing will change. The position of my texture is locked to the geometry, and therefore when I move the geometry, the texture goes along with it. But if you're working with raw geometry where you can select individual lines or faces, check it out. You can move the position of the lines, so you can deform the geometry, and that will not move the texture. So what I can do here is just move my lines so they create a better alignment. Let's say here, this one here, and then do the same thing on this side. There you go. And then do the same thing on this side. So this is the easiest way that you can make sure that your SketchUp geometry matches the texture that has been applied to it. But this is a rare scenario because basically what I am doing here is I am not concerned with deforming my geometry to make it match my image. Usually it's going to be the other way around. Usually you're going to want to deform the texture to fit the geometry. So let's see how we would do that with another example, which is going to be an area rug, right? So the thing about an area rug is that you can't just like stretch it like to make it fit the image. The area rug is going to be whatever size the area rug is, and you cannot make it shorter or longer just to make it fit your needs. So let's say, for example, that I'm creating an area rug that is going to be 6 feet by 9, right? Pretty standard dimension. 9 feet. Okay, so this is my area rug, and I'm going to create a material for that area rug. I'm going to go to create new material. I'm just going to call it rug. I don't care about any of the settings except for the texture. I already have an image that I want to use for my rug, and that is going to be, I think it's this guy. Yeah. Now, what I can do is before I load my image, I'm going to make sure that it is the size of the rug. So this is kind of like the length. This is the V, so that's going to be 9 feet. And this is going to be 6 feet. I'm going to lock it again, and I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to click to apply it. And so once again, we have this problem where my material is not really aligning with my geometry. But in this case, I can't really just start deforming the lines that make this rectangle because I need the final geometry to be exactly 6 feet by 9. And what you're going to see is that this image here has another very common problem when you're working with images that you find on the internet, which is that we have a little bit of a white background. You should not see this white background in your texture, in like your SketchUp material, because it is not a part of the material. You can refer back to my video on the rules on how to select images. So basically I need to edit this image, not just so the placement is correct, but so I don't see the white stuff. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do it using texture position. Now, very important to understand, this is a tool that is only accessible if you have applied a material to a raw face. So just to compare here, I'm going to do something similar. So let's say this is going to be 6 feet by 9 feet. Okay. I'm going to make this guy into a group, and then I'm going to take the same material and I'm going to apply it to it. Now, here it fixed it. It is still not perfect. Again, that white border is bad, but it's a little bit better in terms of placement. But here's the thing. If I need to edit this image in my model, I cannot. I can only do it when the material has been applied to a raw face. So you will know that you can do it because if I select this face and I right click, you will see that I have this option called texture and position. Now, if I go to my group or component and I right click, you're not going to see the option at all. But even if I go inside the group or component and I right click, you're going to see that I still don't have that option. This option is only available when the material has been applied directly to a raw face. Now, one solution to this would be to make unique texture. So I can go here, let's say, yes, create texture, and then right click, and now I have access to it. But ideally, you just want to apply the material. And again, you can see that now these guys screwed up too in terms of like the placement. So one way or another, you're going to want to have the material applied to a raw face in order to use texture position. So I'm going to delete this guy. I don't really need it. And I'm going to continue focusing on this guy. So once your material has been applied to a raw face, what you can do is right click on it, texture, and you're going to click on position. And you're going to get this. And what I really like about this is that it kind of highlights the magic trick that textures and materials do in SketchUp. You will see that you have the image and then it repeats as many times as it needs to in order to cover that surface that it has been applied on. But you're going to see that this image has 4 buttons on its corners. Each button has a color and a different symbol, and it serves a different function. So before I go on to the buttons, you can click and drag to just reposition the image. So I can just click and drag, but this is going to be pretty rough. Like you don't really have inference points or anything. So you're just kind of eyeballing it, which is why I personally recommend using these buttons. So the first button is the red button, and clicking and dragging is going to allow you to move the texture, but with an inference point. So if I click and drag, now I can come here and say that I want this corner to align with that corner. So this allows you to directly connect your texture image with your SketchUp geometry. The second point is the green point. This is rotating and scaling. Same thing. If I click and drag, I can make my image bigger, I can make it smaller, and I can rotate it to any specific angle. The third button is the blue button, and this guy is going to allow me to basically stretch or shear my texture. So if I click and drag, I can make the texture longer or shorter, or as you can see, I can shear it. Very interesting. And finally, the most interesting one is the final button, the yellow button, which is going to allow us to basically distort. So distortion means that like I'm just going to deform, kind of creating a perspective effect. Now, if your texture is a good image, you're not really going to need this guy. We're going to use this guy when we have to use less than ideal images for textures, and I'm going to show you an example of this a little bit later. So this is the first thing that we can do. The other thing, because again, if I just use these buttons, you can see that I can basically drag my texture until it perfectly aligns with my geometry. But the problem is that I still have the white because by default, these buttons are going to be on the corners of the image itself. But my image has a little bit of white on the border that I want to get rid of. So the interesting thing is that you can reposition these buttons. If you want to reposition a button, what you're going to do is instead of just click and drag, you're just going to click, and that is going to allow you to pick up the point and place it in a new location. So let's say that I'm going to bring it a little bit, even if it clips a little bit of the texture, I prefer to lose a little bit of the rug than to have to see some of that white. So let's say I'm going to put it there. Now the cool thing is that I can move all of my buttons, but I can also pick up on the references. So see, I don't know if you can quite see it, but I can snap to where my new red button position is. So that way all of them are kind of still aligned. So this is not mandatory, and depending on what quality an image is, it might actually not be useful at all. So click to pick it up, and then see, you can see that like line that is snapping to my point. And then finally, I'm going to do the same thing with my yellow point. And you're going to see that now I'm going to be able to snap it to the blue and to the, where is it? There you go, to the green. Okay, the image isn't perfect, which is the next thing that I'm going to demonstrate. But now that I have my new button positions, I can click and drag. So I have a new position, which means that I have to scale it. So see, now it's going to be a little bit bigger for the new position, and I actually have to stretch it down. So click and drag. I don't think I need to do anything to this button. Yep, that one is perfectly fine. When you finish using your texture position, you're going to press enter to finish. So I'm going to press enter, and there you go. Now I have a texture that perfectly matches my geometry. Okay, so this is pretty cool because it then means that now you can have an image perfectly match the geometry that you have built for it, and you don't have to be like, like the placement is not perfect. And you can get so accurate with this that, for example, if you're doing this with tile, you can then literally count how many tiles you need, because you can count row, you can count column, and then you can multiply that and say, okay, based on the SketchUp model, I'm going to need this many tiles for my project. So it's really, really nice. Okay. Now that's not the only kind of edit that you can do with texture position. There is another option that is for kind of like worst case scenarios, which is like just straight up deformation. So let's say that now I want to work with a piece of art. So this is going to be a piece of art that is going to be, let's say, 2 feet by 3 feet, also a relatively standard dimension. I'm going to create another texture that is going to be called art, and the image that I'm going to load, I think it's these guys here, and I'm going to go okay. Yes, these guys here. So I didn't even bother with the dimension because, as you can see, this image is messed up. I'm going to actually make it quite small so you can see it. So let's make it 2 feet. There you go. So you can see that the problem here is that, first of all, this is a terrible image, right? Like normally I would not want to work with this image, but let's say that this is my only option. Like the client has told me that they have this piece of art that their mom made, and like they really want to have it, and it's going to be the main feature of the project, and they sent you this like not excellent picture, but you have to use it in the project. So how can we do this? Well, we're going to use the same texture position, but we're going to go a little bit harder with it. And the way that this is going to work is going to start basically the same. You're going to still be applying the material to a raw face. You're going to right click, texture position. But now what you can do, because these 4 buttons here are only really helpful if you're working with a good image. If you're working with a bad image, they're not going to be that helpful. So in those cases, what you can do is you can right click and uncheck fixed pins. And then they're all going to switch to look like this. And what these pins basically allow you to do is just go straight for deformation. So what I can do here is just kind of like mark my new pins in what the corners of this geometry are. So pick it up. So again, just click to pick it up. Click to drop it off, and I'm just going to kind of like outline the actual geometry that I want to have in this texture. Basically, the way that these pins are going to work is that instead of having specific tasks like before, all of these pins are going to distort. And basically all I need to do is now drag these pins to the corner of my geometry. So I can click and drag, and it's going to look really scary. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. Things get worse before they get better. Oh, Christ. Oh, Jesus. There you go. Now it's starting to take shape. Let's put this guy, and there we go. And when you press enter, this is what you end up with. So see, even if you're not working with a great image, you can still use texture position to make it fit your specific geometry. Now, one caveat that I want to give for this method is the fact that when you have an image that is not really good and there's too much perspective, what may happen is that when you distort that image, you may see more pixelation on the corners that were kind of like far away on the image. So keep in mind that this kind of distortion will not fix image quality issues. It only fixes the alignment of the image, okay? So this is the second way that you can edit your material textures directly in the project. And the third one is my favorite, but this one requires a little bit of modeling in preparation. So let's say I'm going to do an arc here, and then I'm going to do another arc here. And here's a cool little trick. If you want to just quickly create a curve face extruded, obviously you cannot just extrude a line, but what you can do is just quickly box it out as a shape. You're going to push pull it to create like whatever shape it is that you want to create. And then all you have to do is delete the excess, and there is my straight face. I don't want to see that line there, so I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to use soften smooth edges to get rid of this line. Let's turn on soften coplanar. There you go. And now what I am going to do is I'm going to select my geometry. I'm going to create a copy of it using move plus control, and I'm going to turn this guy into a group. So the last thing that I want to talk about is one of the most problematic things when we work with SketchUp, which is applying materials to curved faces. So I'm going to create another material that is going to be called flag. And then I'm going to load, where is my image? Is it this guy? No, this guy. Oh, Canada. It is my obligation to put a Canadian flag at least somewhere in my projects. Otherwise, I get fired. So I'm going to say, okay, again, I'm not really concerned with the placement and alignment because I'm going to be doing that in the project. But basically what I want to show you here is what is the problem with working with materials in curved surfaces. So if I apply my material to this face, oh, Jesus Christ, what a nightmare. What a horrible, horrible curse. If I apply it to a group or component that has a curved face, it's still a nightmare. So first of all, we need to understand why does this look so cursed? And the reason is because, remember, we talked about this in a previous video. SketchUp is lying to you. There's no such thing as curved lines or faces. Basically, it is pulling a trick, and what is happening is that you have a bunch of straight faces that are pretending to be curved. So the problem with materials in SketchUp is that when you are working with a curved face, basically each segment of that curve is going to have its own kind of like placement point, and therefore is going to kind of like stagger the image. So SketchUp doesn't understand that from one panel to the next, the image is supposed to stitch continuously. So that's why it causes these kind of like weird, repetition. It's going to do the same thing if you're working with a group or a component. If I go in here and again, I try to apply the material directly to the face, it's not going to be any better. So I want to highlight the fact that sometimes for some reason it seems to understand that it's supposed to do things right, but that's not always a promise. So the main issue here is that you're going to notice that you cannot use texture position on a curved face, even if the material has been applied to the raw face. Because remember, there is no such thing as the curved face. There is instead each and every one of these panels. So if you are a hardcore, you could come here and now use texture position in each of these panels. So I could come here and say fix pins and say, well, you're supposed to start there. And then I can come here and say, okay, well, if you're going to be there, then I don't know, you should be somewhere like there, and then just kind of like stitch it yourself. But this would be horrendous. This would take 1,000 years and you're going to go crazy by the end of it. So I want to show you that there is a better way, and this is using projected textures. Now, in order to use projected textures, we're going to have to do a little bit of prepping. So basically what we need to do is we need to flatten this curved geometry. So how is that going to work? Very simple. The easiest way for me to do it is basically I will draw a flat version of the geometry. So basically I'm going to do a rectangle that is the same dimensions as my curved face, but it's just straight lines, okay? So you can use your arrow keys to make sure that you're locking so the alignment is perfect. And then I'm going to apply my flat material to this flat face. Now, because this is a flat face, here it is much easier for me to use the texture position tools. See, I can just do this, I can do that, and there you go. That's my perfect Canadian flag. Now, doing this is not going to solve my problem with my texture on the curved face. So here's what you have to do. Once you have fixed the texture in the flat face, what you are going to do is right click, go to texture position, and you're going to check on projected. And what this is going to do is make this one texture applied to this one surface a kind of one-off version of it that is now going to only be able to be placed going in the direction of the flat face that we created. So what does that mean? Well, if you have ever been in a classroom with a projector, you may have noticed that if you stand in front of the projector, the image of the projector will be projected onto your body and it's going to kind of like wrap around you. That's why it's called projected. So here we're just doing exactly the same thing. Now the trick for this to work, because remember, this projected property is not attached to the material itself. It's attached to the material that has been applied to this face. So if I were to just select my flag and apply it, you're going to see that nothing is changing. For the trick to work, you have to sample this material. So I'm going to use my Alt key to sample the material. And again, you don't see any change here, but look what's going to happen when I click on my flag. Now it's working. Because again, it's not just picking up on the material information, it is also picking up on the texture position information. Texture position is going to be specific to the face that it is applied on. Each texture position is a one-off that is going to apply to that specific face with that specific alignment. Okay, now before I finish here, a few things that I would like to mention. Number one, you can just get rid of this image. You no longer need to keep it. Just keep in mind that if you need to change the texture position of this surface, you're not going to be able to do it here just because you apply it. So you would have to recreate that image again. Some people like to just turn that flattened image into a group and then they hide it. The other thing to consider is that the position of this image is super important. Now look what's going to happen if I do exactly the same thing. But this time I'm going to do it going in the opposite direction of my flag. So let's say I'm going to come here and I'm going to come here and I'm going to come here and I'm going to apply my same flag image. And you should already see that there's something funky going on here, but let's see if I can fix it. So I'm going to turn off projected. I'm going to come here, texture position. I'm going to move this guy over here. I'm going to scale it exactly the same way that I did before. Now check it out. Just because I turned off projected, that does not mean that this guy's not working. Now, if I come here and I say projected, ooh, it gets the form. Like, what is going on here? Well, what's going on is that the projection is coming from the original image that I created. So it basically can only go in this direction. What you are getting is basically a projection of this red. If I move this image, let's say, I don't know, I'm going to move it a little bit up so it does not clip. And then I'm going to put it here and I pick up and I paint it again. See, it's basically picking up on that shape. So there's some limits to using these projected texture trick. So if I would want to have another flag that goes in a different direction, I would basically have to create a copy of flag. So this is why sometimes you will see that a SketchUp project has the same material several times, is because they're all projecting, but in different directions. Okay. So this is super, super handy in interior design. If you're doing curtains, if you're doing cushions, basically any textile thing that you're working with, it's going to be texture projected. But that isn't the only one. The last thing that I want to address here is going to be the fact that obviously I recommended using this for textiles, but it is not necessarily the only application. Another way to apply this that I really like is for countertops, and you will see what I mean. So if you have a straight countertop, it's not that big of a deal, but let's say that you have something like a countertop with a bull nose, right? So let's say I'm going to come here and I'm going to draw, let's say this is going to be an arc like this, something like that, and then let's say it goes like this, and then let's say it goes like that. Okay, so that's my bull nose. Now to apply this bull nose along the entirety of my countertop, I can select the path, follow me, and then click, and there is my beautiful bull nose for my countertop. So I'm going to make this into a group, and now I'm going to create a new material for my slab. I'm just going to call it marble, should be okay, marble, and I am going to load my final image, which is going to be, I think it's this guy. Yes. Now I'm not going to be super concerned with the size because once again I'm going to end up using projected, but I want to see you what is my concern. So for example, if I have this slab and I have this countertop, when I apply that to the group or component of the countertop, it's going to apply it in the wrong direction, even if I would correct. So like if I scale this marble to be the right size, so let's say that the length would be more like, let's say 6 feet, and let's say that the width would be more like 3 feet. Even if I correct for that, you're going to see that number one, my marble is going in the opposite direction. Like my countertop is going like this, my marble is going like that. So definitely I would have to use texture position to make it go in the right direction. But I also want you to see what's happening here with my bull nose effect. See how it kind of like it's creating that shearing segmentation because it doesn't really understand how that line is supposed to go. So this is going to be a perfect candidate for projected texture. So I'm going to go back to my top view. I'm going to go into the group or component, and I'm going to apply the material directly to the raw face. Now I can right click and use texture position. First thing I'm going to do, you can just do a simple rotation. So there's a few simple commands that you can do when you are working with texture position. So you can rotate, you can flip, and you can reset. Reset is going to bring it to its original like dimensions. So in this case, that is what it is. So I can just rotate it 90 degrees. I also want to flip it left, right. There you go. Perfect. Now what I want to do here is I don't want to put my slab starting at the corner of like the top of the countertop. Instead, I want to go a little bit beyond to basically where my bull nose is. And now what I can do is I'm going to stretch this guy a little bit. So see, I'm going a little bit beyond the shape of my countertop. There you go. And now check it out. I'm going to select that top face of my countertop and I'm going to make this texture projected. I am going to use my sample to pick up this projected version of the material, and I'm going to select the entire countertop and apply the material. And would you look at that? Now you don't just have a marble that is properly scaled and aligned with the countertop, but you can see that it also drapes down. So especially if you're working with a waterfall effect, this looks really, really nice. Like this is how marble would behave in real life. Now keep in mind, there is a limit. Oh, I think I forgot to select that guy. No, it might have been the placement. I need to stretch that image a little bit more. Now there's a limit to this. This only really works, like I did the example of the countertop specifically, because it only really works if you are going down just a little bit. The reason that I'm saying this, like I'm going to show you, if I come here to my countertop and I just push pull it further down, see how it now just becomes like a stretch pixel, basically? So there is a limit to the usage of this projection. There are other tools that are better if you want to do really complex modifications and edits to materials. In fact, I've been seeing comments for other videos that keep referring me to really cool extensions. And I want to clarify, it's not that I don't know those extensions, it's that right now I'm teaching vanilla SketchUp. I want to show people what can be done just with SketchUp, but in the future, in the docket, I'm going to have a video dedicated just to extensions and everything that extensions can do. And then I'm going to do kind of like a victory lap of what are my favorite extensions. So you can look forward to that one. If you subscribe, you'll get a notification when those videos come out. All right. But that is basically the different ways that you can edit a material texture directly in your project geometry. And with that, we have reached the end of this video. I hope you find it helpful. If you have any questions or comments, by all means, feel free to add them in the comments. If you like what you see, you can subscribe and then you will get notifications every time a new video comes out. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.